Mr. Johnson, my second question would be, what are your key points that you plan to contribute to this discussion?
Well, for one thing, we have a national crisis in infrastructure. We need to rebuild the basic infrastructure of the nation, starting with levees and dams, but things that you identify with, like the highway system, the roads, the streets, all of those things are getting old. The interstate highway system's over 50 years old now, and it's wearing out. Occasionally you see great interstate highway bridges just crashing into a river below, and people run off and get killed. And inside cities, there are all kinds of infrastructure needs with things like water and sewer systems, sanitary sewer systems, the way we handle floods and runoff. It's a huge proposition, and we've basically put it off and put it off and put it off, because basically we're living off of the last generation's decisions, and we don't want to pay the bills. And so we just keep on letting it run down, and of course then tragedy happens. Again, somebody runs off an interstate highway bridge they didn't know was collapsing in front of them, and that gets the media's attention for about a week, then we move on to something else. And this levee district is a great case in point. It's a case study in why the nation's infrastructure needs a lot of work, needs a massive national public works program to address levee districts, highways, streets, roads, sewers, water systems, you name it, and we've got problems in those areas. And as a nation, we're going to have to deal with that crisis, because it's only going to get bigger. Some of these water systems in big cities, for example, have water mains that were put in the 1860s and 1870s. And they're made out of cast iron, and they're wearing out. So that's the larger context of the issue of levee districts in Jackson and Union County, Illinois, and whether or not they're adequate to the next flood.
Okay. And my last question would be, what do you think are the policy changes and actions residents could take that would produce a significant contribution to managing the levee problem?
Well, it depends on whether you want to deal with the local or the national aspects of that. The easy answer is nationally the Corps of Engineers has got to be involved, because the Corps of Engineers for the U.S. Army controls the river, basically, and controls anything you do to the river. And so it is by far the biggest player in that. The local people have to worry about things like levee districts, which is right here, what we're sitting in and looking at, that basically protect one tiny little stretch of the Mississippi River. And so everything in between, the county, in this case Jackson County, the state, all the way up to the federal government are involved. And it also demands somebody stepping up to the plate and saying, this is how we're going to pay for it, which means somebody's going to have to pay some more taxes, ultimately.
That's true. Do you think that that would be possible for people to be able to afford to pay this tax rate?
Well, the locals can't do that alone. It's way too big for these local folks who live right along in here. They are dependent on the property tax, which is dependent on the value of the property in this area. And there's just no way that's going to ever be enough. That's why you have to have all those other different levels of government involved.
Okay. Well, Mr. Johnson, thank you. I want to appreciate your time as well as your information that you give us. That's all I have for you, unless you have anything you want to infer.
I do want to add one other thing. I think this is a great example.
Calling for Patrick and Sierra Ramsey, please come to the office. Thank you.
I do want to add one other thing, and that is this is a great example of how civics and American government and American politics ought to be taught in high schools, because Jamie and her students don't just study this stuff in the textbook, which you've got to have some of, but that's not the end of it. If you go out and get involved, these young people have gone out and gotten involved and tried to change policy, and they've gotten a great civics and government lesson from doing so.
I agree.
Okay?
All right. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Okay, so I'm out of your way here, and you've got Professor Nick